Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Great to be here. Hoping to hear a lot more from the panel, and we have a very interesting panel, as you all can see. And of course, as always, I like to keep it as interactive as possible, and we have some very interesting people obviously in the audience, so we will throw it open after we hear from our panelists out here. The theme is a very wide one, and Mr. Dhaul has already made his opening remarks. So our panel discussion starts off with the theme, of course, of this conference this year: Can India afford an unequal society? Gentlemen, thank you so much for your time. Thank you for being here with us today. So let's start with some opening thoughts from all our panelists. Let's see where they want to take this theme, how do they want to mold it, and what are the central points of their discourse. So I'll request the panelists to give us some anecdotes to start off with, and then let's see where this journey really goes. So can I start with you, sir? Why don't you give us the policymakers' perspective on this? The quest for equality at a social level, at an economic level, and of course at the energy and infrastructure level.
Well, first of all, thank you, Mr. Dhaul, for bearing me for the third time. I think this is the third time I'm here. And it's nice to see, in spite of the rain and all, the house is almost full. Well, we have been told that we'll get about 2 minutes. In 2 minutes, I can only have Maggie noodle prepared.
No, you can take much longer than
2
that.
minutes is only Maggie time. It's a very serious subject. And, you know, Martin Luther once said that if you can fly, run. If you can run, walk. And if you can walk, crawl. But keep on moving. It's not a very profound statement I'm making. I'm just reminded of Santa. He said, "Ye sab to theek hai, magar jana kahan hai?" So ye topic, what we are discussing, ultimately, where are we leading ourselves to? It's like I said, that it's definitely one of the most important topic, perhaps of this century. And I come from public life. And the reason I say this is I'm quite aware. And if I restrict myself, this phenomena is world over. But we are restricting ourselves to India. In India, there are two classes of people. One, which sweats to reduce the stomach. And the other class sweats to fill the stomach. There are just two classes. Of course, the middle class is there. He is neither here nor there. But basically, this is what is worrisome. And we are all too busy, really, to solve the problem of rich, which to my mind doesn't have problems. We talked about in one of the slides that is a Brahminical society. And Brahminical society doesn't mean Trivedis and Chaturvedis. It means those who can afford 5 stars. And here also I don't see a Dalit, I don't see a Adivasi, I don't see a OBC, I don't see anybody. So in many ways, this also is a Brahminical society. There is lot I think we would be talking once we get into conversation. But let me just tell you and flag that in the last 15 years, the gap has not been so much as it is now. 90% of the wealth of the country, if it is concentrated in one person, then I think there is something wrong. I'll just conclude this by just giving you one example, and I'll be done. When I was the railway minister, James Bond, the Skyfall team, what is his name? I'm forgetting. Anyway, the James Bond guy.
If you're talking about your time, Roger Moore.
Not Roger Moore.
I'm
talking about Skyfall. Daniel Craig. So he came and phoned me out of the blues that we want to have a scene in India on Indian Railways. I said, good enough. There are 3 conditions. Condition number 1, no compromise on safety. Condition number 2, you cannot have people traveling on the roof in any of your seat. And condition number 3, you have got to be the brand ambassador of Indian Railways and say that Indian Railway is stronger than James Bond. Yeah. Both the conditions were agreeable, but the second condition, that people traveling on the roof of the train, he said, that is the reason I am coming. Where else in the world I can go to Africa or India? There is a fight scene and I have to be on the roof of the train. I said, I cannot show people traveling on the roof of the train because this is an international project and I don't want India to be shown in bad light. But then I thought that Chaiya Chaiya was also on the rooftop. The reason I am telling this, it's a fact that today also the have-nots travel like sardines. Even if they are inside the train, double the amount of people which with the capacity is 70, they are 140. So on one side we have bullock carts and the other side we have bullet train dreams of. So this certainly cannot really go parallel. And why talk about India? No society can really live with this much of gap. If we are trying to say that the society has to be equal, I think that theory has been also thrown to the garbage. That was the communist theory. That theory also doesn't work. There has to be incentive. So idea is, how much should be the gap? How much should be tolerance? And lastly, if we talk about development, my measure of development, Mr. Dhaul, is just 2. 1, open the tap anywhere and drink the water, anywhere in the country. And the second measure is, the tap should not be leaking. That's about it. Thank you.
Tap should also be flowing, ideally 24/7 to start off with. But anyway, that's for later. Let's get some thoughts. Suhel, you'd like to give some anecdotes?
I'm delighted that Dinesh Trivedi unveiled the Trinamool mandate. If you can run, walk, if you can walk, crawl. I mean, that's what's happening to Bengal today, which is a good thing. Look, I want to cut out the hypocrisy. I don't want an equal society. I mean, I don't want to be as intelligent as Lalu Yadav or as honest as A. Raja or as significantly dishonest as Dayanidhi Maran. We are always going to be an unequal society. All societies are unequal. By any measurement, cerebrally they are unequal. By wealth they are unequal. By social status they are unequal. I mean, let's cut out the, faff, or India is an unequal society. The bigger problem which needs to be identified by this panel is poverty exists everywhere. The classic poverty of India is the impoverishment of opportunities. We go out of our way to deny people their basic rights. If that is corrected and society remains unequal post that, so be it. America is an unequal society. Societies from time immemorial have been unequal, whether you measure them across the lines of caste, creed, color. And we are a racist nation, we especially. I mean, look at the way we refer to people in the Northeast. In spite of Manmohan Singh having maintained a studied silence for 10 years. So we are a classic case of a society that wants to tom-tom words like equality, justice, we want to be a fair society. Pardon me saying this, we've had some of the most corrupt people as Chief Justices of India. We've had some of the most corrupt bureaucrats. We've had some of the most corrupt industrialists. We've had some of the most corrupt editors. That's the way the cookie is. So, what do we do? Forget the problems. We all know where the problems are. Will Narendra Modi change all this? I don't think so. Because I don't think it is important for one man to come on the top and change everything unless the average Indian is willing to change him or herself. Will we change? I don't know. I have a lot of belief in the generation, 2 generations after mine. Because of probity, because of peer shame, not peer envy, and most importantly, because we cannot create a just India or an inclusive India. I even detest words like, inclusion and all that nonsense. This is damn good for Parliament, when Parliament functions. So, where is the reality of today's India? We are depriving the average Indian of his or her place in the sun by denying them the opportunities which are enshrined in our Constitution. We don't have an education system to talk about. We don't have a healthcare system to talk about. I'm sorry to say this to the politicians in the panel. The politicians on this, not on this panel, but most politicians are self-serving, as they've been for years. You know, so where is the solution in sight? Today, the media has an agenda. I've often said that in India, the press is as free as it chooses to be. You can't be hunting for TRPs and developmental stories in the same breath. And sometimes the nation does want to know what is going on in the developmental sector. My issue is not whether India is unequal, equal, whether we'll be, number 2, number 3 in economic terms as a superpower. My thing is, when will the average Indian be proud of the India he belongs to? When will the average Indian think of India before he or she thinks of himself? I have no problems with wealth being captured by 1, 10, 100 individuals. But the opportunities must be clearly made available. There must be a rule of law. You can't have people tinker around with the justice system in this country as they've done. You have chief justices of this country who have no respect for the law. They should be behind bars. But you can't say all this because you'll be hauled up for contempt. So if a system is a cozy goddamn club like we have in India, there will never be any form of equality. People have to have the right to speak out. You can't have the muzzling of the press. It's fine for some people to say, oh, I want to leave one particular channel and move to another channel because I think I'll be muzzled. Bullshit. Every channel, most channels, most media houses have always been owned by industry in some form or the other. The issues are far deeper, and I would request the panel to address them. The issues are, does the common man have basic rights? Be a commoner in India and try and file an FIR. We play havoc with food subsidies. The discussions on our media channels are about, silly things. It's about Sania Mirza rather than about the drought in Andhra. Because you have these jokers who think that they can sensationalize caste, creed, and color, and you have a multitude of jokers who are willing to follow these rascals. So where do you go? Narendra Modi congratulated someone who topped the CBSE in Pune, but on that day a Muslim boy died. He was killed by 27 rogue elements from Ram Sena. You should arrest the guy and hang him. But you won't do that. And you will then create an aura of a country where you have another joker saying, oh, from this state, from Goa, this joker says, we are a Hindu Christian, or I'm a Christian Hindu. I mean, you cannot have this kind of pandering, and there must be serious objections by the so-called intelligentsia to this kind of nonsense. I'm delighted that a lot of people have now had the courage to take this on, that the social media, which is largely unfettered, reflects on this. This will lead to some semblance of equality. More importantly, this will lead to some semblance of highlighting the inequalities and the inadequacies of this system. That, to my mind, is a great step forward. And, as Dinesh rightly said, that I don't think it is fair, and I do this most of the time, so I'm guilty. It's not fair only to abuse the politicians. Because those guys have to, earn their bread every 5 years. The bigger rogues, some of them, everyone other than in this room, is the bureaucracy. They're the bigger rogues. They have mastered the system of ineffective work. Paralysis, paralysis, paralysis. They are the best doctors where operations are successful and patients are dead.
Suhel, allow me to step in very quickly, though we thought we'll open up rebuttals for later. Who doesn't have an agenda? Corporate houses?
I said corporate house. See, the other good thing about television anchors is they don't listen.
They do, but
they
ask a follow-up.
If you remember, I said industrialists in this country are equally guilty.
Absolutely.
Everyone. So the point I made is, again, if you go back from the non-cognitive to the cognitive, which means if you listen rather than hear, you will hear what I said earlier, that the day we start thinking about our country before ourselves, we will have moved the needle. Is that possible? I really don't know. I know I have never had an agenda on anything. I have abused my own clients if I feel that there has been injustice. I was the first person to say that as far as Singur was concerned, Dinesh Trivedi is witness to this. I used to advise the Tatars at that time. I said what has happened in Singur shouldn't have happened because you have to take the local population. And Chidambaram for once made an intelligent point in working hours when he said that never separate the tiller from the soil. So my point is, I'm not the only messiah. So, forget me, I'm a bachelor, I have nothing to lose. I'll walk away into the sunset. Point I'm making is people in this country must have, to my mind, the liberty to speak. We must have a mechanism to listen and to act. And I can tell you today, I go and speak at at institutes of management. I have great hope in the youth of today. And it's not a cliche. They are more engaged with the idea of India. They are more engaged with Indianness. And most importantly, they are most upset about injustice. If we can allow them to be unfettered, we will be a changed India. Otherwise, we will meet at the Marriott next year, have this panel discussion with an elegant television anchor, and then retire to single malt in Smirnoff.
Well, I am very sure most of the people in this room, if they rewind back to their college days, had the sort of idealism that Suhel just spoke of. It's a challenge to the panel. So we have a very grim picture that's been painted.
Not at all. No, not grim. See, again.
But
you all want the country to be destroyed every evening. From 9 to 11, destroy the country.
We have a young evening ahead, Suhel. Let's see what the panelists have to say to this. But
I'm a bachelor. I have to be optimist every day. We are hunting every evening for prey. For God's sake, optimism is in my blood.
Okay, corporates, politicians, and the media, agendas everywhere. Can we really strive for some semblance of equality then? It's an interesting couple of minutes ahead. Let's get some more thoughts in. Mr. Bordoloi. You've already had a series of allegations, is a very strong word. I'm sure Suhel will take offense to that.
When Mr. Trivedi gave his opening remark, he mentioned about the James Bond. Actually, now I feel that Daniel Craig is just sitting beside me, licensed to kill. The way he was saying things, and as a practicing politician, I really feel very nervous sitting beside him. But then,
Two politicians on the panel, and they're nervous of you, Suhel.
Well, yes, certain issues he has raised. These are obviously, these are very difficult issues today. But let me tell you one thing, India is changing. The fact remains that today we are discussing about unequal India. We are discussing about all the discriminations. We are talking about, how a common person is being denied rights. This itself shows that India is waking up. And let me tell you, the politicians are also changing. Gone are the days when politicians would ignore the electorates. Gone are the days when politicians would not visit their constituencies and would not work for the people. No politician can survive today if one is not sincere. Let me tell you this. And, this is a composite society. We are all stakeholders. The politicians are also a reflection of the society. When you say that there are corrupt elements in every sphere. You are talking about corruption in judiciary, you are talking about corruption in police or bureaucrats, in politicians or industrialists. Actually, this is the reflection of our society. So India is changing, but it is high time that we wake up and we can address all these inequalities. But I would also agree that what you are saying, that there are two Indias, really, in many ways. Because when democracy flourished in India, unlike Western European democracy, their industrial transformation had already taken place. But we started, because largely, predominantly, India was poor, India was rural, when really democracy took its roots here in India.
So we have to take up a lot of measures. India is growing, India is developing, no matter how slow it is. I am very hopeful, and we can address all these issues.
You know, the points, one of the points that Mr. Dhaul made in his opening remarks, it was really striking for me when you said that we meet at this conference every year and the narrative has to change. You have to bring something new to the table every year. This coming from someone who represents a sector where legacy is the one term, legacy, chronic old issues are what come to mind year after year after year. So I'm saying if someone from the power sector can think of writing a new script every year, I think we're on the right track. So speaking of new scripts, Mr. Padgaonkar, let me come to you. And over coffee, we were just discussing whether this grand mandate that our new rulers have got with them, whether a new script can indeed be written. What are the feelers that you get so far?
Thank you very much. Well, you know, let me just begin by being as concrete, as specific as possible, because when we are lost in a maze of abstractions, we do tend to get lost. And I'd like to begin by one of the most interesting conversations that took place between Jawaharlal Nehru, Prime Minister, and one of the great thinkers of the 20th century, a Frenchman called André Malraux. Malraux came to India in 1958 and held 3 conversations with Nehru. And during one of them, he asked Nehru, what are the big challenges that you face? And Nehru's answer was, I face the following challenges. The first is, how do you build a secular state in a profoundly religious society? The second challenge is, how do you build an egalitarian order in a society which is riven by so many hierarchies? The third is, how do you inculcate a temper of rationality, of reason, in a society which is so overwhelmed by superstition and irrational belief? And he then added that perhaps the only way towards this goal is to inculcate the spirit of democracy down to the last Indian citizen. I believe that these challenges are still very much with us, but let me just introduce a slightly different perspective, if I may, because it's very difficult to compete with Suhel Seth in these matters, but let me try. I think there are at least a few things that we as Indians can be proud of what we've achieved in 47, and it's on the strength of that that perhaps we can try and see what we need to do in the future. With the exception of the emergency decreed in June 1975, we have brought in governments and thrown out governments regularly. Very few countries that became independent in the late 40s and the 50s and the 60s have been able to do that. Secondly, we were able, right at the beginning, without too much bloodshed, to build a nation out of more than 450 principalities. The integration of India as a nation state was an absolutely remarkable achievement. We were not able to do so, as I said, in places like Junagadh, Hyderabad, and Jammu and Kashmir, but by and large, I think this was an extraordinary achievement of a young nation. The third thing that we were able to do, again without too many problems, is to solve a very ticklish issue, which was that of language. It took a long time, but I think we were able to do it. Attempts have been made in the past few weeks to revive that controversy, but that's a different story. But I think we were able to bring that about. And number 4, I think we developed a large consensus on the fact that you needed, if democracy has to be meaningful, you needed therefore also to have a social dimension to that democracy. And I think there exists a fairly large consensus which is developed. What has happened, however, is that quite apart from new population pressures that have built up on the resources of the state, there have been also other challenges from within and from without. And therefore, when we need to take a look at these four things that were listed in the conversation between Malraux and Nehru, where do we stand today? I think all said and done, despite all its drawbacks, the democratic system continues to function. The fact is that it all boils on, unfortunately, to merely electoral success and not as an ongoing process. The second thing which we've been able to do is that for all the chaos and corruption and ineffectiveness of the political system or the bureaucratic system, India has witnessed far less violence than similar societies elsewhere, which again have been unequal, inegalitarian, etc. You just see what's been happening in the past 30-odd years in places like Africa, Latin America, etc. I think by and large, we've not done too badly. Where do we therefore stand today, and what we expect from the Modi government? Now, I'm not going to spend too much time talking about it because it's been in office for just a couple of months. I don't think there has been a distinct break from the past, and this is just as well. A lot of people mourn the fact that there's been no radical departures by this government. I think no, on the other hand, a certain degree of continuity is the hallmark of a mature nation. Yes, there will be distinct emphasis here and there. I think, for example, and if I were to point out just 4 or 5 things which have changed or are changing, is first and foremost, there is a stable government. And it's not a coalition stable government. I think that this is important. We've had, for the first time since 1984, a government which enjoys a majority in the House. We've also had, for the first time since the first general elections of 1952, a non-Congress party that has a majority of its own. This, I think, will bring in a certain number of changes because ideologically, the party which is now in power has had a very distinct brand of politics than all the others. We'll see how it works out.
What would be the visible changes that you would
The visible
expect?
changes, I think, will be in 3 or 4 areas. The first one, which is already beginning to happen, is, I think, the recognition by the Prime Minister that he would need to use the instrumentalities of the state in order to bring in his agenda of development. And this means, again, whether you like it or not, that you've got to give confidence to the bureaucracy. I think that the bureaucracy has been in many ways demoralized by a large number of factors in the past few years. But I think he's taken one step towards saying, I need the bureaucracy, and therefore this is how I'm going to use it. The second change that's happened is also in the kind of monitoring that he does of his cabinet colleagues. I mean, those of us who were privileged to look at the functioning of the government at the center would tell you that cabinet meetings really didn't do very much. The Prime Minister was silent most of the time. He did not announce decisions. I think that has been changing. The danger, of course, is that, has been pointed out, that you probably have today a Prime Minister's office that is as powerful and perhaps more powerful than that of Indira Gandhi in 75, 76. However, that doesn't spell danger because I think there is going to be a far greater balancing of power.
Center state.
First of all, between the executive and, let us say, the judiciary, and the much maligned media, I think, will again be playing a role in this. So there you've got the mode of governance is beginning to change. We'll see that. The second thing which is happening is, up front, I think there is a recognition that you need a very clear direction as far as economic policies are concerned. Now, unfortunately, the first budget that Mr. Jaitley presented didn't yield that degree of vision, quote unquote. Yeah. But you have that in bits and pieces. And I believe that some of those bits and pieces will fall in place when Mr. Modi addresses the nation on August 15th. That's what I understand they're working towards. The third thing, and this is where I will end, is, and here we've got distinguished former members of the Foreign Service who will be speaking here. But I think a beginning has been made to ensure that our strategic and foreign policy interests are far more focused than they were earlier. Beginning with the neighborhood, and I think also reaching out to other parts, but we'll have occasion to talk about it. On the other hand, there is a gray area which is some cause of concern. And the gray area is the relationship between the government in power and the ideological mentors of this party stationed in Nagpur. To give you one recent example, you take the GM crops issue. In Parliament, they said, yes, they're going to launch 15 pilot projects to try this out, but then they overturned the entire thing. And of course, no explanation was given. Quite apart from that, we've had historians, who are far, far more talented than Toynbee, Macaulay, etc. One particular gentleman who is probably the world's most imaginative and creative historians by the name of Dinanath Batra. And Mr. Batra has been claiming in textbooks being distributed in Gujarat that India invented not only the aeroplane, but India invented the motor car, and invented the television, and invented the DNA, and invented genetics, and so on and so forth. All right. We've had a case again of someone, and I think Suhel made mention of it, that one of the sporting icons of this country was suddenly reduced to being the daughter-in-law of a neighboring country, rather than being acclaimed for what she had done. We've had other instances in this very state of Goa, where a minister made a particular statement and then retracted it, even though he did add that I think I was right, but if you think I was wrong, then I'm sorry I've hurt your sentiments, and so on and so forth. So the ambiguity really lies in the relationship, I think, between the party in power, its ideological mentors, the fact that you don't denounce this very overt hostility towards the spirit of tolerance. And I'd end up by saying that perhaps the biggest change that has happened between the predecessor government and this one is that we have Mr. Modi, who as the prime ministerial candidate during his campaign was absolutely all over the place. He was energetic, he traveled thousands of miles, and on television his speeches, 2, 3 a day, were shown live. And suddenly after he becomes prime minister, what happens? He begins to resemble his predecessor in office.
Early judgment? Would that be a slightly early judgment?
Absolutely not, because there were areas where he needed to come and say a few things. All right. The fact is that he seems to have drawn a lesson from, I think, Suhel Seth's fulminations about the media, because he's chosen not to have anything to do with the traditional media. He's kept the traditional media out of his trips to Bhutan and to the BRICS Summit. I think he relies much more on the social media, which is fine. But the fact is that in terms of communication, this government needed to do much more, which is not doing. It's early days, as you said, right in the beginning, but we do have, therefore, a canvas to start working on, because no matter what, today's generation is far better informed, much more aware, all right, much more vociferous than you can get, and therefore, you just can't now be fooling people. And I think this is the one takeaway that you've got from the last elections. You can trust the media, truly, let me tell you, to keep on hammering away anytime you find a degree of tomfoolery. And this, particularly, I won't mention channels because that won't be fair, but I still think the nation wants to know. Thank you.
See, Dileep is upset about Narendra Modi's silence because all his colleagues no longer get free caviar and champagne on Air India One at our cost. people like Veer Sanghvi, who are great, authorities on the perfect omelette, were given cars when they went abroad on prime ministerial junkets. I don't think the Prime Minister of India is expected to speak on everything. Yes, I believe he should have called up that family of the boy who was killed and condoled.
Let me ask Dileep actually, where did you feel the silence come in? Where you felt that here's the man who's completely gone cold, gone quiet after coming into power? Where did you feel that the Prime Minister was too silent when he shouldn't have been?
Well, let me tell you where. Right in the beginning, the MOS in the Prime Minister's office, Mr. Jitendra Singh, made a statement, said that the government is initiating a process to try and abrogate Article 370.
There was no clarification.
Now, this created a tremendous amount of jitteriness in a sensitive state like Jammu and Kashmir. They let the whole thing die down, that controversy. But I thought that this was a moment, since it happened to be someone in the Prime Minister's office, for the Prime Minister to say, look, we do want to debate on a subject. Now, this is one area, but I quite agree with Suhel that if there is, a case of a brutal murder of this boy in Pune, please see why someone like Obama, the minute there is some catastrophe of a little family, there is an immediate reaction right from the President of the United States.
So let me quickly, because I think we're also running quite up on time, let me bring it back to the issue. We started off by talking about the concept of equality. Before we come to industry, and I'd like to take some views from you, sir, and industry and equality and profits and equality and social good, etc., etc. Before that, very quick point on the way the rulers of this country have thought of equality. Equality always till now seems to be stemming from a concept of dole-outs. So you give 2 rupees per kilogram of a certain cereal, or you give subsidy on kerosene, or you give subsidy on fertilizer, etc. So you keep subsidizing, you keep giving money, give alms to the poor. That seems to be the mindset for many, 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 many years. Let me ask once again the political leaders on this panel, on this stage here, can we expect that to change? And ties in with what Suhel was saying. Why can't we simply provide opportunity? Let people earn, the concept of per capita income increasing, and therefore that perhaps brings forth its own concept of equality. So, Mr. Trivedi?
If you have noticed that I'm very quiet.
That's why I'm asking you the question.
And the reason, and the other politician is also very quiet. The reason we are quiet is we know the realities. It's very well to crack a joke, to abuse, and to, go. What are we talking? We are on the surface, scratching the surface. You know what kind of India we are living in? You have no idea. Just no idea. They have no money to have an X-ray done. Now you can turn around and Suhel can say, we blame the politician. I mean, let's not get into blame game and all. But politicians don't come from heaven or hell. Let me finish.
Sure.
Please let me finish.
Sure.
It's a very serious stuff. Today, India with all kind of capabilities, if you go to any university in the world, the best of the students are from India.
Sure.
The best of the faculty is India. Best of the brain power is in India. In spite of that, let me finish. Otherwise, I just keep quiet. Carry on.
No, my simple question was, why?
Simple question is, I'll tell you. Simple question is, we rank 135 in the Human Index, below Botswana and occupied territories of Palestine. You know how many suicides take place, farmer suicides? Is it a modern India? Are we going to accept this? We cannot accept this. Sohail, please let me finish.
No,
I know you're very emotional about it. You're very emotional about it.
Not at all.
Because, let me tell you, and I'll just quote one experience of P. Sainath. One experience. What he said in Vidarbh. They are farmers. It's very difficult for them to get their daughters married. Okay? Sohail, you are getting a little restless. You can carry on.
I'm just trying to figure out who I have to blame. I'm thinking, should I blame Pakistan or Fiji for the state of India?
You can blame anybody, but our topic here, our topic here, please understand. Our topic here, can India afford a society which is so unequal? And I'll give you that peace Haina's example. If you have time, I will give you. If you have no time, I'm here to come to a serious discussion. If you just want to have entertainment, then please call somebody else. I am just telling you, just listen to one example. In the district of Vidar, four daughters of a very, very poor farmers were to get married. And that father could not pay the simple thing which he had to pay. With the result, what happened? He committed suicide on the wedding day. And on one side, the barat, whatever little barat was coming, right? And on other side, the funeral. And the people in that village said that if these four daughters cannot get married today, they'll never get married. So they ensured that funeral goes somewhere else and barat comes from somewhere else. And on that same very day, in Taj Palace, there was India Fashion Week, and I have nothing against that. I have nothing against wealth. But on that very day, India Fashion Week, they were wearing the same cotton was produced at this place in Vidarbha. This is the dichotomy. And this is where this society, please understand, if we think that if we are immune to violence, violence can never take place in India. The summer which took place that in Arab Spring can never take place.
I completely appreciate.
I'm just concluding. If we are thinking that this will carry on and the world will never have a violence, that's not true. If we go to our voters, all they ask for roti, kapda, makan, pani, bijli, and railway line, and nothing else.
Correct, sir.
That's
but my question, I come back to my question. I appreciate your example. I appreciate the tragedy which is, engulfed this country, whether it's farmers or the poor people. My basic question, which remains unanswered, unfortunately, is...
Who's to be blamed?
No, that's not my question. That might be Suhel's question, not my question. My question was...
No, I know who's to be blamed. That's not my question.
Okay, I repeat my question. My basic question was to that poor Aam Aadmi or that farmer who's being confronted with such tragedy, why should he only be uplifted by a dole out?
No, he should be given an opportunity.
Why are members of parliament 60 years after independence
I'll tell you why. Because the kind of society which we are creating, where we are closing down small healthcare centers and opening up 5-star hospitals. I have nothing against it. So you are depriving the poor. We are taking land from the government. Again, some corrupt politician would give that land to somebody. And I'm just not trying to protect. Of course, there is plenty of corruption. And today, the fallout of the entire thing is corruption at the top. Corruption absolutely at the top.
Do you believe subsidy is the way, and it needs to continue?
Subsidy and all these are very, very small little issues. We have got to create wealth. If we do not create wealth, and we have got to clean up the system. And who can clean up the system? You can talk about, if you say that all the politicians are bad, all the bureaucrats are bad, all the police is bad, that's not true. There are many, many politicians, I can tell you, who may not have money even to buy a small little flat. There are quite a few. But the focus is only on the bad ones, not at all on the good ones. There is no encouragement. You are trying to use the same brush for everybody, so you will never get a good politician.
I'm very bad at painting.
Not you. You means the society. No, the whole point is what kind of society you want to create.
You want
to create a society where you look down upon the guy who has nothing. The subsidy and all. How are you, if this guy cannot afford, if he doesn't have jobs?
But Mr. Trivedi just used some very important words here. He actually said, creating wealth. I caught on to that. I'm sure a lot of people in the audience caught on to that. He said creating wealth. Very quickly, Mr. Bordoloi, your thoughts on this. This whole concept of dole out slash subsidy versus enabling someone to improve his or her lot.
No, see, in India, at times, subsidies are important and necessary. I would like to give my own observation. When you watch a national television channel like Times Now or NDTV, you can see acrimonious debate taking place, persons like Suhel, Seth or whoever it is, it's very difficult.
No, what do you mean acrimonious?
No.
We are saying it as it is.
Okay, fine. But you have lost out another part. If you have seen the satellite channel, regional satellite channel, pan-Indian, regional channels, you will see that increasingly these channels are showing, you can see that actually. People are increasingly coming to the street, protesting. There is a very palpable and very, visible intolerance. There is a less fear to the authority. They are defying police.
So is that the media's fault, or
no,
is that the activists?
I'm not holding media at fault. But when I'm saying this is a reflection of society, increasingly, people, I'm talking about the common people, are getting intolerant. They are less fearful. I'll tell you this. This is my own experience. I have seen in my own state that they are routinely defying police. They are trying to burn down the police stations. They are doing a lot of things. They are taking law into their hands. This is a very fearful, I'll tell you, this is a very fearful thing that is happening in India. Why it's happening in India? Because, this divide, urban-rural divide, that poor-rich divide, it is very frightening. You may shrug it off, but I'm telling you, this is the reality in today's life. So that is why it is very important that we have to somehow bridge this gap. We have to take measures. I am not saying that you bridge this gap only by doling out subsidies and trying to think, but you have to generate income at the grassroots level. You have to involve people at the grassroots level in the production activities, or somehow you have to involve these people in the economic activities. This is very important, and this is what the challenge is in front of us today.
And now let me get Mr. Dhaul in. He's been listening so patiently to all the thoughts. Mr. Padgaonkar, you have a point on this?
No,
just one brief point. And you see, this thinking in terms of binaries, doles versus non-doles, this doesn't work. Things are far more complex. What I would say is that, obviously, you have to create wealth in order to be able to distribute it. Correct. At the same time, you
but
need to
as a political society, have we even bothered looking that way?
No, I think they
Creation of wealth has been sort of a untouchable issue, has it not, over the last many, many years?
I think the political class needs to be credited with much more than is due, because, look, unlike you and me, they have to go back to the people to get elected. Absolutely. All right. It's all very well for us in a studio to hold forth and so on. What I'm saying is, things are far more complicated. To come to this question of doles, I think what needs to be done, and there is a consensus possible, is that you can't have doles as merely vote-getting tactics. Yes. What you need to do is to have a very calibrated way of ensuring that certain entitlements to food security, etc., are done. That calibration doesn't take place. Secondly, the last mile implementation is awful. You don't get things done. And thirdly, this is where probably this government is trying to change things, that you link up a certain number of entitlement rights with the creation of new assets. I think if there is some way ahead in that. So if you've got Manrega, which gives you 100 days, you make sure that rather than merely digging up a road and again reconstructing it, that it leads to something else. But I think you can't, and I'm going to go back to what Dinesh just said, so long as you figure so low in the Human Development Index, we should just shut up and work. I think this whole business of a glorious India, shining India, Indians doing very well, doesn't really take you far, and at least in 3-4 respects we need to do it. I think the provision of potable or drinking water is a main problem. The question of sanitation has now come forward in a very big way. The third thing is access to elementary health facilities. Yeah. And fourth, and the most important one, garbage disposal. But the fourth, the most important is, look what is happening to our women. In state after state after state, whether it's the Khap Panchayat, etc. And look at what's happening to our children. So, instead of having a Boy Scout attitude towards this, you've got to fashion policies which, even while encouraging economic growth on the one hand, making the economy to be as investor-friendly as possible, getting rid of archaic rules, all of which will be discussed in the next 2 days. There ought to be a thought of bringing in people at various levels to try and address the low human development in this country. Can it be done? I think it can be done. But it requires not rhetorical. It can't be done in a television studio. It can't be done by blaming this or that.
As long as it gets done in Parliament or somewhere between South Block and North Block, I think no one will complain.
No, 1 minute here. I just want to. you know, this is a typical political device to say, oh, television studios, media, blah, blah, blah. So let's forget everything. We're all wrong. 1947, this country's got independence. According to Dileep Padgaonkar, we are a shining example of democracy. According to Dinesh Trivedi, who sits in the so-called temple of democracy, where half these guys don't ever work, they go into the well, they abuse each other, they fling microphones. We've sat down as citizens. I pay my taxes. I have no bloody cash injection in my system. I want to know where the hell are my taxes going. If I ask the question, I'm told, oh, this is not a solution. You know, who are you to ask these questions in television studios? I can't ask them in a court of law because the judiciary can't be trusted. Where does the common man ask these questions? A. B. You talk about Vidarbha suicides. Yes, they exist. Why? Because of a culture of subsidies in an area called fertilizers, where you've buggered the soil of this country. But we can't ask the questions because we have no right, because, you know, there's a fashion show happening in Taj Palace. Societies are not built only by talking about the ineffectiveness of certain people getting rich. They have to be built on by enabling everyone to get rich. As you rightly said, the creation of wealth. So where is the solution? The problem, Dinesh, is that you may understand this, 10 other politicians may understand this, but there are political compulsions. 5 or 10 years ago, you didn't have these jokers in the Khap Panchayats. Today, an educated Wharton-returned Sachin pilot will go and grovel before them because it suits his political needs. Is it my political need? Do I belong to the goddamn Congress or the BJP or the renowned Trinamool? I don't. I, as a citizen, am seeing my country decline when my country should improve. I have every right to voice my anger. Therefore, what's the solution? The solution is, and I agree with you, this India shining, India first, Mera Bharat, all that's all rubbish. I think the solution lies in 3 or 4 areas. Number one, we have to have punishment for those who dick around with the system. You send Raja to jail for 11 months, the guy's walking out. Kalmadi out. You need to send them to jail and you need to throw away the keys so that people know that they're accountable. I would, if I was running the country, I would shoot these guys. But obviously I'm not, and I never will. The second, and I mean not only politicians. You catch an industrialist, all those guys who went to jail in the 2G are now flying private planes and moving around. And this society sucks up to them. So, the realities of our hypocrisy. Third, and I'm sorry to say this so blatantly, the third is, until you realize what the problem is, how will you find the solution? I have often said that what Doordarshan does, and we mock them, but there are tremendous stories of development. There are enormous innovations happening. I sit on pro bono on boards like Akshay Patra. You should see the work that they're doing. There are armies of selfless people in this country who we don't celebrate. Look at the way we treat our armed forces. These rascals who were, you know, running governments in the past have politicized. You've had a political army chief now in the ministry, in this government. So when you destroy every institution of India, you need to pause and say, how do I rebuild every institution? Indira Gandhi was the biggest destroyer of institutions. She corrupted the justice system, politicians, everything. Today, there are, you know, I mean, it is ridiculous. Can you imagine, we as a country have given away free housing to Meera Kumar, whose father forgot to pay his income tax? What kind of role models do you want? So, to give you a solution, my thing is, identify 3 or 4 problems, as Dileep Padgaonkar has said. I think there is a lot to celebrate in India. My personal belief is that Modi will do well. To quote Shakespeare, as Brutus said, it's not that I love Caesar less, but I love Rome more. In his case, it's not that he loves India less, but he loves himself more. So he will create a legacy by way of which things might happen. And finally, and I said this in my opening remarks, we as a country can't talk about the Infosys and the TCSs of the world if 85% of our population has no access to decent sanitation or potable water. We should be ashamed. But here's my question. Am I supposed to do it? I have not dug a tube well in my house. It's against the law. I can tell you of politicians who have, of bureaucrats who have, of industrialists who have. Where does one go? If you don't dick around with the law, you have no life. So unless and until you have a robust punishment system, I don't think things will change.
Because perhaps for all these years, the norm in our country, whether we like to agree or disagree publicly or otherwise, has been if you have power, you move forward. If you don't, find your own ways. Is that going to change? That's a wider debate, but Mr. Dhaul, you've been listening to all kinds of views, and I would want you to talk from the industry's point of view. We have had innumerable experiences, whether it was the SEZ policy when it was opened up and all kinds of people who went and applied, or whether it's the case of coal mining and who should be given licenses, who shouldn't be. How credible and responsible can industry be when it is advocating for open markets, higher tariffs, equality, wealth creation, etc., etc.?
Well, let me start off on a slightly lighter note because everyone has been so serious. And then I'll come back to the main issue. A lot of bureaucrat friends of mine are very unhappy in Delhi. Their visits to the Delhi Gymkhana is being watched. They stopped playing golf. They're being stopped from playing bridge. They have to spend 12 to 15 hours a day. So I think Suhel has a point. This government at least is serious about making people work. So I see a very positive light to the fact that there's a serious curve on golf and bridge and the other things that goes on in the golf club and the Delhi gym. Having said that, answering your question, I'm extremely optimistic. And the reason why I'm optimistic is I'm optimistic about industry and I'm optimistic about India for a very simple reason. You don't really have a choice. You have to create wealth. You have to create employment. It will happen. Whether you like it or not, you may not like the way it may happen, you may not like the speed at which it happens, but it is going to happen, number one. Number two, the big problem today is this. While yes, you're empowering the bureaucrat, which is very important, and I agree with you that the bureaucrat has been getting indecisive over the last few years because of the various factors and that we'll discuss as we go along. But the fact of the matter is that the bureaucrat has no system to deal with private sector. The bureaucrat is running in a framework which is designed for government to function in an insular manner per se. Now you want a private sector chap to come in and start putting power plants with you. You want him to participate in the railways, or you want him to participate in infrastructure like telecom, or you want him to participate in making roads or bridges, etc. And then, as Suhel rightly says, somebody comes along and says, oh, this road concession should not be for 25 years, rip off the toll booths, put them on fire, some politicians are involved. Third party, nothing to do with it. So what does this talk about? It shakes the confidence of investors. My problem, if I am, as Suhel rightly put, as a citizen of this country watching this scenario, my concern is how am I going to get 25-year money for infrastructure when my banks are borrowing for 5 years and 7 years? My banks have a huge issue. They are only in the horizon of 5, 7, 10-year borrowing, and they have to lend for 25 years. They're not able to do that. I have an issue where my investing community, my financial community for a minute, in this country is suffering from sectoral caps. Because huge amount of debt mounted up. No one is accountable. 30,000 megawatts of power plants are lying stranded, okay? To some extent, there's been some relief with the coming in of this coal, a little bit of coal, but there's no gas, there's no coal. And where is a power plant, there's no transmission line. Where is a transmission line? The power plant couldn't be built because somebody said that, there's an environmental problem. So there's a whole lot of stuff that needs to go into this. And my submission is this. All of this can be sorted out if the investor, the developer, is assured of one thing, that there is going to be sanctity of contract. Once I do a deal with the government for that 25-year period, that deal stands.
But there have been instances, and you mentioned Mundra, both the Adanis and the Tatas, where the developer or the industrial house itself wanted terms of the contract to be changed because of certain circumstances which were, beyond the scope of understanding at that point. So then sort of, are we talking about sanctity of contract with certain gray areas or certain sub-clauses?
Very good point. Sanctity of contract in the Indian context. So as Suhel rightly says, now you have to manage contracts. I'm going to leave it at that.
Manage contracts. Okay.
Yeah, and you know, what he basically means is, when it suits Indian industry, they will break the law. As simple. They will go to the politician, they will go to the district collector, they will do it. That's the hypocrisy of Indian industry.
In this
You
case, they
saw
went to
Rahul Bajaj
regulatory-
screaming about Bombay Club. After giving us a crappy scooter for 30 years, he didn't want competition. This is the tragedy. And today he's venerated as CII president or ex, whatever.
But Suhel, in this case, to be fair, I mean, it was the regulator that stepped in. Then the Supreme Court coming out and upholding the regulator's order. This is a specific case, of course, we're talking about.
With due respect, let's cut out the fluff. India sits on the world's second largest reserves of bauxite. You can't mine an inch. Why? Because Rahul Gandhi, as unintelligent as he is, goes and promises tribals an elephant walk for 8 elephants, half an hour every day. Not realizing or understanding how bauxite is mined. Then you had dolts like Jairam Ramesh, followed by an even bigger dolt, Jayanti Natarajan, who screwed up the environment clearance system. Were they not on the take? Of course they must have been on the take. I don't know. No one asks me for money, thankfully. Second, if, as Dinesh says, if Parliament was allowed to function, BJP is equally responsible, Congress equally responsible, including his friend, who used to be my colleague, Derek O'Brien, equally responsible. I mean, y'all are tearing things. You have destroyed the office of the Prime Minister for the last 10 years. You had a Prime Minister who was in office but never in power. I mean, what kind of a country are you running? Then you say, please don't get angry. Fine, we won't get angry. We will remain calm. We'll retire to a cave. We'll have Baba Ramdev's Ayurvedic medicine.
Even he gets angry at times.
And then die. But we won't get Shakti Sthal of 17 acres of land in prime Delhi. So the reality is, where do you go? The only solution is come to Goa, speak like this, get drunk, and sail away into the ocean. But I don't see any other way, because I can't get angry, I can't say the truth. What the hell do I do?
Well, let me end by saying this.
Then if I go on Times Now, you'll object, which is unarguably the finest channel on this planet. I hope Times Now is recording this.
That's a debate for, I think, post this session, when the dinner and drinks are served out.
No, I tell you, when we talk about wealth, please understand, we are missing a point. There's enough wealth in India. And like everybody said, that like Suhel said, I also want to add, like Suhel said, there is enough wealth. The problem is in distribution. And I'm not talking like a communist. We have to create an opportunity. And Dileep, I agree with you that Manrega, I had gone to the Prime Minister. I said, this Manrega money, which is 30,000 odd crores, you give it to me to the railways. Railway are in the villages, they are in towns, they are in cities. I will use this 30,000 and give that 100-day job so that you are creating wealth. And that is what I meant, that you have to create wealth. And you have also to recognize, whether it's a bureaucrat or a politician, you have got to say that, yes, this guy is doing a good work. If you say that everybody is a rascal, then what kind of
No, 1 minute. Who got rid of Dinesh Trivedi from the cabinet? A lady called Mamta Banerjee. I didn't.
No, tell me.
His own leader sacked him.
No, tell me, I mean, tell me.
No, 1 minute. He's blaming me as a citizen.
No, tell me,
Dinesh
Suhel,
Trivedi
what
does a
kind
great
of
job.
system
Mamta
you
Banerjee
want?
sacks him.
What kind of system you want?
And he's still with her.
Do you want
he's still in bed with
democracy,
her. Bed
or
with her
you
means
want
in
to
her
be the
party.
general of the
All
army
right.
and start shooting
Gentlemen,
everybody?
gentlemen,
No, I think,
gentlemen.
no, it's a serious thing. The problem is, when Suhel is there, you can't talk serious. And we all enjoy that on some point
But
of
this
time.
is a serious
But
matter.
the fact is, what you want, you don't want democracy. This is the system which we have asked and which we have given to ourselves. The problem is where? Where we don't participate in democracy. If there's something terribly going wrong, then you must come out in a very peaceful manner.
True,
and if you think that people are not angry, we all are angry because we are part of citizens also. We do not have a permanent member of parliament tag that you are permanently, thank God for that. So we are also part of citizens. Why do you forget that?
Well,
Dinesh, just one really, listening to all of this, the national slogan is Satyameva Jayate, let truth prevail. The fact of the matter is, in our country, whatever prevails is the truth.
well, we need to.
Superb.
Right. Whatever prevails is the truth, and therefore, earlier, if you took objection to this or that political party, because you believe that they were not being truthful. The minute that party comes to power, you find all
Truth
kinds of
changes.
lovely things to say about that party.
Well,
Satyameva jayate, let truth prevail. No. Whatever prevails in this country is the truth.
All right, on that note, we need to really draw this session to a close, and to Suhel's point that this will all end in, in a round of scotch and some good food. I can only say that if after those rounds of scotch and good food, at the end of this year, if this sector goes out with, a couple of megawatts or gigawatts added, couple of tariff issues resolved, some more states with 24/7 power, if a year down the line, those are the achievements thanks to the scotch and the good food, so be it. On that note, very quickly, the audience has been listening patiently. If there are any quick comments, very quick snippets or questions.
One comment.
Yeah.
Harry, I think you got the subject all wrong. All this talk of an equal society is nonsense.
Correct.
You have what is called as an equitable society.
Brilliant.
Societies are equitable. No two human beings can be equal. I hope from next year you make this an equitable society. Then you don't have arguments between Suhel and somebody else.
No, but I made the point. Why don't you advise Harry? You should advise Harry from next year.
Yeah, do it from next year for the simple reason that the people who talked of equal societies, people like Mao Zedong and Stalin, they all lie buried. We unfortunately inherited the policies of a fellow called Harold Lasky. Other British colonies did not do so. And we should ask ourselves a simple question. Why is it that in economic terms, all our eastern neighbors have done better than us? Yes. In Southeast Asia and East Asia. I think that is the more serious thing, rather than debating equality.
Perhaps it's the fact that ours is a much more colorful society. And politics.
I mean, let's not kid ourselves. I mean, Mr. Trivedi has spelled out really what we are all about. So that's fine as a quip. But I think seriously the debate should be equitable, not equal.
Well, my job was to provoke it.
Okay, any other quick comments or remarks from the audience? Yeah, I think we have someone there.
My point, sorry, that was loud. My point being that I think India is like a lot of Californias based in sub-Saharan Africa. And that's why when we talk about all these divides, because the California wants something else, and what the sub-Saharan Africa wants actually at times gets forgotten. And the sub-Saharan Africa has got all the wealth and in terms of minerals and everything, which we say rich India, but they do not see the benefits of it. Because the benefits the Californias enjoy. Until the time we don't get the Californias or create more Californias in India rather than sub-Saharan Africa being the predominant, space where people are not earning anything, people are distraught, like Mr. Trivedi rightly pointed out when he says that you don't know what people actually want. When you made the point, are SOPs required? Yes, they may be required in sub-Saharan Africa. In California, they are not. So that's why when we say, oh, SOPs required for food or food subsidies, they may be required, may not be required. But the debate on what sub-Saharan Africa requires should be greater than what California requires. I know California is required to drive the sub-Saharan Africa. So that's my point.
Okay, I think with that, we'll draw the session to a close.
Time to be spiritual.
Time to be, spiritual, all right. We'll leave that interpretation to each individual. Thank you so much to all our panelists.